How's everybody doing? Full? Full of beef and unbelief? It's all right. See if we can't get rid of some of that unbelief tonight. Turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 22. And one of the weirdest passages in the Bible, I would say, and I think probably so many people setting out to read their Bible, if they got past, in the beginning God, and then they got past the serpent talking to the woman and that whole business, they got to this passage and they thought, what in the world is that all about? Why in the world would God do something like that? And I think that we all ask that question, don't we? We come to that place in our life where we realize that something is not the way that it should be. It's probably oftentimes in our day and age, we get that phone call. The phone call that we all regret. The phone call that we all dread getting. And that phone call is like, something happened to your child. Something happened to your spouse. Something bad happened. And as a pastor, I get that phone call a lot. Not so much for my wife, or my kids, hopefully, God forbid. But, like the phone call I got to find out that Lily had leukemia. The phone call I got to find out that Lori Sullivan passed away. And just so unexpected sometimes. Like I had just talked to her the day before, and then I get a call that next day, knowing her husband is out of town, and just to think about the implications of everything, with that news that you get, and it's not good news. It is a call that you never want to make. To think about your child being hurt, or to think about somebody you love or somebody you care about is not doing well, or has been in an accident or something like that. And yet, as we look at this passage, really it's like one of those calls. It really is. And you think about the way Abraham must have felt to answer this call from God that he would soon, regret answering. It's like, I think you have the wrong number. You're breaking up. I can't hear you. It's like one of those things. And so just to jump in Genesis chapter 22, it says, "Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. And he, probably wish he would have said, sorry, wrong number, or thank you, wrong number, please. Something like that, hung up the phone. But then he said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I tell you." Now this, to us, should conjure up all kinds of interesting thoughts. What is the Bible advocating? Human sacrifice now? What is going on here? And to see this whole thing, just kind of grapple with the idea here that God is telling Abraham to take his son and kill him. Now, just to set the scene to know where we're at, you remember that this started way back when Abraham was in Ur of the Chaldees. He was, worshiping idols along with his family, and God came to him and spoke to him and said, Abraham, Abraham, get away from your family, get away from your land, get away from your father's house to a place that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And he gave Abraham these promises again and again that I'm going to bless you, and you're going to be the father of a multitude. Continually telling Abraham all the promises that he's going to give him. And so as time goes on, Abraham leaves Ur of the Chaldees, but he takes his father's household with him and his family with him. And they go to, excuse me, they go to another place. I can't remember, I just blanked it out. I had it and it went away. But they go to another place and they hang out there for a while. And as his father finally passes away, and they leave that place and go to the land of Canaan. And as they go to the land of Canaan, he takes Lot with him. Now, so he's left his father's house, but he still has his family with him. And of course, finally he comes to that place where he tells Lot, hey, you go, you lift up your eyes, look at what is best, and you take whatever you want. If you go that way, I'll go this way. And so, of course, Lot chooses the land towards Sodom and goes that direction. And Abraham, finally, as he finally is in that place of obedience, God comes to him and he makes him a promise again. Abraham, I'm going to bless you. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. All the nations of the world through you will be blessed, and I'm going to make you the father of a multitude. Now, of course, Abraham's very excited about this son, and he's getting older and older. I think he was probably 75 when he left Ur of the Chaldees, and now he's getting into his 90s, and, nothing's happening. And finally, God, appears to him after he's already had his son Ishmael through a concubine, not even his wife. God appears to him and says, I'm going to fulfill that promise. And he says, what about Ishmael? And he's like, I'm going from Sarah's womb, from your wife's womb, I'm going to bring a child. And that child is going to be the one. He's going to be the one who all the promises are hinged on. And so now Abraham, laughs, and Sarah laughs, and everybody laughs that God's going to do this thing when they're so old because they were dead in their bodies. And yet that's just like God, isn't it? To do something impossible. And so these old people, 100 years old and 90 years old was Abraham. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Sarah was 90 years old. This baby comes, and, it's just like, whoa. This baby of promise. It had to have been God. But now some time has passed, and let's zoom forward. We speculate. Now we know that Abraham has had Isaac. Last time we saw him send Ishmael away with the concubine. He's a teenager. Send him away. And now it's just Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac, the child of promise. And we find out in the next chapter, in chapter 23, that Sarah dies. Now, just to do a little bit of math, Sarah was 90 when she had Isaac, and she dies when she's 128. And so this is somewhere between 3 years old that we're assuming that Isaac was weaned to 37 years old. And so it's speculated, knowing the language that's used in this passage of Isaac, that he's probably in his 20s or 30s. Now that puts everything a little bit into perspective, because when you see some of the movies and stuff, you see Abraham taking this little guy, little tiny kid. No, he was a full-grown man at this time. It's speculated. And so here's Abraham, who's given all of these promises. Every promise that his son is going to be the heir, who is going to be the father of a nation, of a multitude of people, through whom all the nations of the world will be blessed. His son Isaac, who has no children yet, who's not even married yet, and God says something impossible. Take your son and offer him as a sacrifice. That's a trip. Think about that. Why would God do that? Isn't this the guy who all the promises of God are supposed to come through? And now you're telling me to sacrifice him? And you have to just kind of imagine, what Abraham is going through in his mind, what he's struggling with this whole thing. And yet, so far, he's noticed a few things. He's noticed when he did his own thing and he goes down to Egypt and lies about his wife being his sister, it's bad, right? And yet when he does what God tells him to do, like get rid of Lot, like trust God to do, and it's good. And then when he goes to have a son by his wife's handmaiden, it's bad, right? Ends up with heartbreak. But then when he believes God, and it's accounted him for righteousness, and he actually has his son Isaac, it's good. And so far in his life, every time he has done what he thought was the right thing to do, it ended up being a bad thing. And every time he did what he knows God told him to do, it ends up being a good thing. And he's beginning to see a pattern that obeying God and doing what God wants me to do brings blessing into my life, and disobeying God and going my own direction brings pain into my life. And I think that the older you get, the more sane you become in some ways, right? Isn't it amazing how older people, they aren't as stressed out about some things, and they're just a little bit more tempered, and they're not so high-strung, and they're not so emotional. They're just kind of like, okay, I've been through these roads before, and I know that it's going to turn out okay. And it's almost as though Abraham looks at this and he says, there's more to this than meets the eye. I believe that I can obey God, and all that stuff about him making Isaac the father of a multitude and all of those things that he's promised through this son, those are his problems. I just know that I have to obey God in what he's told me to do today. And I can't worry about all of that, because I believe even if God tells me to kill my son, that God is going to work something out. God is going to somehow handle it. Because, these things that that God is doing here are far beyond, far bigger than Abraham could possibly imagine. So God speaks to him, tells him to go to the land of Moriah, to offer him as a burnt offering. Just as a side note, I was just thinking about this today. People have asked me over the years about being cremated. Some people are creeped out about that. Is it wrong to be cremated? And I tell them, well, you're doing in a few hours what it would take, 10 years to do. You're all going to end up ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? And from the earth you came, and to the earth you'll return. And yet God is going to take that dust or those ashes, and he's going to resurrect them someday if you believe in him, right? And so I don't think it matters. But notice that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son and burn his body. And so he was going to cremate him. And yet, what's really amazing, I think I might be getting ahead of myself. I'll get to that in a second. It says, verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning. And I can imagine that Abraham probably didn't get a whole lot of sleep that night. Can you imagine? God tells you this. It says, now notice this, and in the Hebrew, this is kind of a string of thoughts. They're all linked together by the conjunction, meaning that it was continuous action, that Abraham didn't stop and do anything else. He just continued to, it says he rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God told him. And so Abraham, complete obedience. He's not flinching. In fact, he does everything himself. Can you imagine? He's 120, 130 something, and he's splitting the wood. Now, I'm only 41, and I know splitting the wood just gets to you, It can be tiring. But here's this old guy, and he's taking responsibility for the whole thing upon himself. I'm going to take care of all this. I'm not going to involve anybody else. And probably in a sense, I don't know, you guys, when you're nervous about something, you just kind of, you ever do that? You get really nervous about something, and you just start working and doing a bunch of stuff, try to take your mind off of it. I eat. I like to eat when I'm nervous. Just anxious eater. But it says he went to the place that God told him. But notice this on verse 4. And on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. Now, something you have to remember about Abraham is that he believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. So when Abraham believed God for something, he knew it was going to happen. And so in his mind, and the Jewish mindset is that when God says something, it's a done thing. That's how the writer of Revelation can say without contradiction that Jesus was the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. Why was he the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world? Because God said it in Genesis 3:15, right? He said that he was going to bring the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. And so from the very beginning, God promised the son that would be born, and he was the sacrifice that died in the place of Adam and Eve. So too, when God says something, it's done. And so in Abraham's mind, 3 days prior, when God said, take your son to a place that I tell you and offer him as a burnt offering, in Abraham's mind, my son is a dead man. My son's already dead because God said it. And God told me to do it. And so he has this whole thought process, and he's taking him to the place of Moriah, now to a mountain that I tell you. Now we know from 2 Chronicles 3:1, it says, Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on the mountain of Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And so we know that there in Jerusalem, there was a mountain range called the Mountain of Moriah, and that they actually built the temple, the Bible tells us, on the site or on the mountain that Abraham offered his son Isaac. And so as you look at Mount Moriah there, the Temple Mount, it kind of goes up, and there's this raised up place. I've only seen, you can actually go there. It's really weird. You know, do you guys know that you can just go anywhere and drive down the streets of any city, just about anywhere anymore, through Google? I was driving through Homer the other day, you know, just like Mike Buck's like, turn there, okay, turn there. We were going along and just cruising the streets, and he showed me where his apartment was and this building he wanted to buy, and it's kind of cool. But you can actually go on Google and look at these sites. And Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount is, it kind of goes up like this, and then there's a cut through the mountain where they've put a road in, and there's a Palestinian bus depot right there. And then it crops up onto this little hill that is just off to the side, and it's the same mountain, but it's the highest point of the hill. And that's where they would have done sacrifices in those ancient times. They go to the highest place of the hill, and they would have done the sacrifice. So the temple was here on Mount Moriah, but just a little bit farther off was this little knoll that's up a little higher, where there's a cemetery there. But that would have been the place that God would have offered, that Abraham would have offered his son Isaac. Right there in the same place with the Temple Mount, But 3 days before, God told him. And so now, Abraham receiving his son back, we'll see in just a moment. It says, verse 5, and Abraham said to his young man, stay here with the donkey, and the lad and I will go yonder and worship. So don't be confused by the word lad. The word lad here in the Hebrew is the same word that he just used for young men. Okay, so the young man and I. And this could be anybody from the age of bar mitzvah, right? 8 years old to 40 years old was considered young man in that, using that word, you know. So no longer me, because I'm 41, so I'm an old man now, I guess. But the lad and I are go yonder, and notice this. What are they going to go do? What does he tell them they're going to do?
Go worship.
They're going to go worship. So, you know, Abraham had his guitar, and probably not, you know. And of course we can worship God, you know, as Marissa just led us in worship, and that was amazing. And just to be able to sing and be in the presence of the Lord, you know, that's worship for sure, you know, to worship the Lord and to sing about Him and to sing to Him and, you know, tell Him how much we love Him through words and worship and music. But sometimes worship can just be on your face. In fact, the word actually that he's using here means to prostrate yourself. Which means to be on your face, to lay down flat on your face before the Lord. You know, to humble yourself before God, to pray, to seek the Lord. And yet sometimes worship can be sacrificed too, can it? And you think about what that means. This is giving God what He wants. I'm going yonder to worship God. I'm going to give Him what He wants from me. And sometimes that's a difficult thing, isn't it? You just think about some of the choices that men of God or women of God have had to make in terms of sacrifice because they knew that God wanted them to do it. How many people laid down their lives not willing to deny Christ, not willing to be set free because they wouldn't worship Caesar. You know, if you read Fox's Book of Martyrs, it's full of people who would lay down their lives as an act of worship to the Lord. You know, I just think of that old Keith Green song. He says, I want to be like those who spilled their blood and gave it like water to you. You know, and just to think of the thought of that, and what does it take in order for somebody to be willing to lay down their life for Jesus? I'm sure we've all thought about that. We've all thought about, you know, what would it be like if somebody threatened my life and said, you know, deny Jesus or you're going to die. And I think that we've all probably thought about that. I mean, especially with, you know, watching on TV these ISIS killings where these men sat on the beach and they're beheaded, you know. Of course, our president told us it's just about climate change. That's why this is going on. It's just climate change. Sure, we all bought that. But the reality is that there may come a day, as free as things have been here, there may come a day when that's required of us. And I guess we just hope that God would give us the grace to do that. But the reality is the only way that we're going to do that is when we find Jesus to be more precious than even our own life, right? And I think that the reality is that if we will seek Him and know Him for who He is, that we will realize that He is good, we will realize that He is worth dying for, that His promises are steadfast and true, we're willing to lay down our lives for Him. In fact, Abraham wouldn't be the only person in history who would give up their children to die for Jesus or for God. It happens all the time. They come in, deny Christ, or we're going to kill your child. Happens all the time. And there's stories upon stories, and I caution you against reading Fox's Book of Martyrs. You might read it in small chunks, because I know, for me as a Christian, and many other Christians I know who have set out to read that book and listen to the stories of the people who stood before the lion cage, and the Roman soldiers are begging them, just say Caesar is Lord, that's all you have to do, and we won't kill your kid. And they said no, and then they threw their kid in, and he was torn by the lions. And then the wife is torn by the lions. And then finally, after the husband watches his child and his wife die, he is thrown to the lions. And probably glad to be killed at that point, after seeing his precious loved ones die, but knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they're going to Jesus. And it takes faith for that, doesn't it? I mean, you don't just let your child die for nothing. And yet Jesus is so real to them, so tangible, so precious to them, that they're not only willing to lay down their own life, but they're willing to give the lives of their family for His honor and for His glory, knowing that this is not the end. That there's something far greater, something far more wonderful in Jesus and the promises that He gives us than life itself. And so Abraham, understanding this, knowing that God has a plan here, he says, we're going to go worship. And I don't know what we think about when we think about worship. But sometimes worship is laying down everything that is precious to you. Everything that you hold dear. And maybe as simple as, okay, God, I'm giving up Sunday afternoon football because it's an idol in my life. I'm not saying that that's it. You know, don't get freaked out. But maybe it is. Maybe that is like more precious to me than anything else. Or maybe it's, you know, my candy bars or Twinkies or whatever it is. I don't know. Could be that habit, that addiction, that whatever. And I think a lot of us have faced that, right? Where it's like, man, I just feel like I need this. I need this in my life. And God is saying, no, you don't. Grab hold of my hand and let go of it. And you will see how I will bless you. And so to just drop that to the side and grab hold of Jesus. And He does. He blesses us. And yet sometimes that worship that way to let go is so scary, isn't it? It's scary. And yet so essential. So he says, we're going to worship. And notice what he says, we will come back to you. What? God told you to sacrifice your son, and now Abraham, is he lying? No, he's not lying. He really believed. Now he believed that God wanted him to sacrifice his son. He's going to go through with it. But he also believed, if I sacrifice my son, then God is going to have to raise him from the dead. And God will, because he has promises to fulfill through this kid. How do I know that he thought that? How do I know? Hebrews chapter 11. Turn there with me real quick. Excuse me. Shouldn't eat right before you preach. Give you gas. Hebrews chapter 11. Now this is significant. It says, verse 17, Hebrews 11:17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in your seed shall be called, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. And so Abraham, knowing that God had promised that all the promises of God, that the Messiah was going to come through this son of his, that if he killed him, God was going to raise him from the dead, which he did figuratively. In other words, 3 days before he died, and in Abraham's mind, he's a dead man. 3 days later, he would be raised from the dead. Figuratively, because God said he was dead, and then God would change it. So, verse 6, so Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, and he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and the two went together. The word went together here in the Hebrew means in agreement. They went in agreement. So Isaac, being the younger, burlier of the two, carries the wood. That's the heavy part, right? Abraham carries the knife. Can you imagine carrying that knife? Had to be like a dagger in your heart. I love the description that Tozer gives, and it says, this patriarch, as he sat under the stars on the 3-day journey on their way to Mount Moriah, no doubt wrestled with God about this whole thing, and came to the conclusion, through the pain of his wrestling, that God was even willing to raise him from the dead. You know, that's a paraphrase of what Tozer said, but it's along those lines, that God was going to raise him from the dead. He came to that conclusion, God has to do this. He has to raise him from the dead. And so they go together in agreement. Isaac carrying the wood, that's important, and Abraham carrying the knife and the fire in his hand. So Abraham's going to plunge the knife. He's going to light the fire. He's going to inflict the pain upon his son. But Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, nervously, just kidding, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Now, this is really interesting. There's a couple of words, and something that's always important, especially in the book of Genesis, is that when things are mentioned for the first time, they have importance or significance. And so this is the first time in the entire Bible that you see the word love. And it is a father's love for his son. And if you understand anything about the Bible, you realize that the first love that was ever exchanged was between a father and a son, right? There was no love before that. Before the earth was formed, before time began, the father and the son had a love relationship in heaven before there was ever a man and a woman on the earth. And so you have to understand the love between a father and his son is a very significant thing biblically. And any father who has a son, I remember when my son was born, instantly I was a love slave of that little guy. He broke my heart, and I remember all the fear and love and responsibility I felt for him. And I also remember feeling really guilty that, man, my parents loved me this much. And I had no idea how much my parents could love me. I can't believe this. This is awful. I treated them so poorly all those years, and they loved me this much as I loved that little guy. And I just remember how intense that love was. And so you have to realize, and this is the thing I've realized, and this is something, for you guys who are 40 or 20 or 25 or however old all you guys are, that your parents, your mom, your dad, love you as much as an old fart as they did when you were a baby. And you were much cuter when you were a baby, and you weren't as frustrating, but they love you just as much. They still love you that much, right? And that's a difficult thing for us to grasp, And yet he loved this boy. And so the son which you love, that's the first time that love is mentioned. It's also the first time worship is mentioned. Now think of the context of this. The first time worship is mentioned, the first time love is mentioned, excuse me, and also the first time lamb is mentioned. And although those are all significant words when it comes to redemption, when it comes to what the Bible says about Jesus and his son and whom he loves, and how you are his child and he loves you. All these things are very, very significant when it comes to that, and here they are in this chapter. And so he says, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And then Abraham says something very strange. And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself a lamb for the burnt offering. Now, I love the way the King James renders it because it leaves out for. And it says simply, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for the burnt offering. So the two of them went together. So what is he telling him? He's like, God's going to provide himself a lamb? Well, eventually God will provide himself a lamb, right? Remember John chapter 1, verse 29, where John the Baptist points at Jesus and he says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. It's pretty significant, all related to this. Verse 9, then they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order, and he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Almost sounds like a dirty trick, huh? But notice the old guy. He's the one building the altar. He's the one preparing the wood. And he binds his son. Now, if Isaac indeed is in his 20s or 30s, and probably the next verse we're going to see Isaac as 37 years old, 38 years old, was it? I don't know. Sarah was 127 when she died, so he's 37 years old, probably 36 or 37 years old. The very next chapter. So where is he now? Just a little bit younger than that. And yet he's willing. And I don't know how he's willing, but perhaps just at the command of his father, this is what the Lord wants. This is what the Lord told me to do, son. Just hold still. Help me put you up on this altar. Can you imagine? I think to a degree we do that anyway, don't we, as parents? Don't we set our kids on the altar of the Lord and say, Lord, these children are yours. They belong to you. Your will be done in their lives. I trust you. I'm going to let go so that you can do what you need to do in their life so that they can come to you, so that they can know you. And that's all we do is give our kids to the Lord, isn't it? And yet it's so easy to take them back. And I bet everything in Abraham was screaming, God, stop this. And yet being completely obedient to the Father. He laid his son on the altar upon the wood. And the idea of a burnt offering wasn't that they burnt them alive. It wasn't like being burned at the stake or something like that. But when you did a burnt offering, you would actually kill the lamb first, drain its blood out, and then you'd lay the parts on the brazen altar, and then you'd light it on fire, and you would consume. It would be completely consumed. It was a complete sacrifice. That's what a burnt offering was a complete sacrifice. Now, oftentimes, we think about animal sacrifice and don't conjure up ideas of witchcraft, animal sacrifice ceremonies. Really, what they did was just very similar to what we do today when we butcher an animal. They would cut its throat, let its heart pump. Its heart would start pumping really hard. When your throat gets cut, your blood starts to pump really fast, and it would pump all the blood out of the body, right? That's what we do today. They take a cow or whatever, they cut its throat, let the heart pump the blood out of the body. It drains the body of its blood so that they're able to eat it. And then you butcher it, right? And that's exactly what they would do, except for in the case of a burnt offering. But in these cases, they would cut the throat of the animal. You would place your head on the head of place your hand on the head of the lamb. In a sense, you were transferring your sin to the lamb. They would cut its throat. And so you would watch the blood pour out onto your feet, splattering you. And yet it was a real picture of the danger and the awfulness of sin as that innocent lamb died in your place. And then they would quarter it up, and they would lay the fat on the altar, and then the priests would eat some of the meat, and they'd give some of the meat to you oftentimes, depending on the different sacrifices. But you were really butchering an animal, and you were taking it home, and you were eating it. And so today we're kind of hypocritical when it comes to sacrificing animals and butchering and all that stuff, because we like to go to Albertsons and just get it in a nice little package. It's all done, and I don't have to look at all the gore, right? But in the old days, it was like, you actually went out to the barn and you grabbed your chicken and you cut its head off, right? And you had fried chicken after you plucking the feathers and everything. These days, we don't have the stomach for that, right? And most of us, you pluck a chicken and you go to fry it up, and you're like, I can't eat this. I used to know this chicken, I named it, I can't do this. I can't. We have trouble with that these days. And it's like the story of the pig and the chicken. They're out in the barn, and they knew that it was breakfast that morning. They knew that there was going to be a bacon and eggs breakfast. And the chicken was nervous, and he's pacing back and forth, and he's like, they're going to take my eggs. They're going to take my eggs. What are we going to do? He says to the pig. And the pig says, what are you talking about? You're involved, but I'm committed. They're going to take your eggs, but they're going to take my life. Pretty intense. Anyway, so he's going to kill him. He's going to actually sacrifice him with a knife, and that's why he's carrying the knife, to kill the offering before he burns it. And that's what's going to happen here. So it says, I think, what verse am I in here? Oh yeah. Then Abraham stretched out his hand, verse 10, and took the knife to slay his son. And so Abraham has his son on the altar. He has him bound. I'm sure Isaac's eyes are very wide, and he's like, this is not what I thought about when I thought about worship. And Abraham is thinking, me neither, son. And he has the knife up, old geezer, 120 something years old, or 130, getting ready to kill his son. And then it says, verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here I am. And we talk about the angel of the Lord here, we're talking about God. And oftentimes when you'll notice in your Bible, as the angel of Jehovah, angel of Yahweh, the name of God. But it's capitalized, meaning that it is God speaking. It is Jesus speaking. Oftentimes we'll see the angel of the Lord. We'll see this when Joshua goes into the promised land, and it says the angel of the Lord stood before him with a sword drawn. And he says, what did he say to him? You guys remember? Take off your shoes, for you're standing on holy ground. Remember? And that's what the burning bush said to Moses. Take off your shoes, you're standing in the presence of God, in other words. And so the angel of the Lord, and then Jacob, of course, wrestling with the angel of the Lord. and it puts his hip out of joint, and he realizes after he's done wrestling, he's like, I've wrestled with God and lived. He realized he was wrestling with God, but it's the angel of the Lord. So this is the same angel of the Lord speaking to Abraham. It's God speaking to Abraham, and he said, here I am. And I wonder at that moment if Abraham didn't think, I think God forgot where I am. I think God forgot this whole thing. I can't believe that God is making me go through with this. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or the young man, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now this is so bizarre, because as you look at this whole thing, and I remember wrestling with this as a kid, reading through this passage, like, why would God go through with this? And this has troubled people throughout the ages. In fact, Catherine Luther, you might know her husband Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, the reformer, the man who wrote the 95 Thesis and put it on the Catholic Church door in Wittenberg, the guy who was responsible for the Protestant Reformation and probably some of the seeds of evangelicalism and Bible-believing Christians today, protesting against the Catholic Church and wanting to get back to the Word of God and not to the systems of men. That was the Martin Luther. Him and his wife were doing devotions one morning. Catherine Luther being a former nun who escaped a convent and got married to Martin after they left the Catholic Church. And she said, I don't believe this story. This has got to be added to the Bible. There's no way that God would have somebody kill their only son. And Martin looked at her and he says, Catherine, but God did kill his only son. God did kill his only son. And there lies the significance of all of this. In fact, in Judaism, if you think about it, the Jews believe this story, and they think of Abraham as this great father of faith who was willing to even give up his son. And yet here, within the pages of Genesis chapter 22, lies the gospel in such an amazing way. Notice this, it says, and Abraham lifted his eyes, verse 13. Did I read all verse 12? Let's read verse 12 again. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its thorns, and Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So he received his son back from the dead 3 days after he had died. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. And he said, to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And in some translations, in the mount of the Lord, and it can also be translated this, it shall be seen. So what is he talking about? Many Bible commentators believe that Abraham, standing on the highest point of Mount Moriah, as he's standing there and he's looking at what God has done, and he's provided this lamb as a substitutionary sacrifice for his son, is proclaiming prophecy that in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. It shall be provided. It will be seen. And 2,000 years later, after this event, an only son will carry the wood up this same hill for a sacrifice, will be nailed to a cross at the highest point of Mount Moriah, called Calvary, Gordon's Calvary, and he will die for the sins of mankind. In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. God will provide himself a lamb, loved by the Father, and yet offered up as a sacrifice for us all. And here it is in Genesis chapter 22. Why would God do this to Abraham? It would seem that Abraham knew in some way that he would be acting out prophecy as he brought his son to this place. that sometime in the future God is going to use this place in a significant manner, and that He is going to provide a lamb to take away the sins of the world. Isaac's descendant, Abraham's descendant, Jesus Christ, who is the lamb who would take away the sins of the world, and then 3 days later rise from the dead. Isn't it amazing? I mean, here it is in the Old Testament, in Genesis, and yet one of the most significant and fascinating prophecies in the entire Bible about Jesus Christ. So Abraham names the place Jehovah Jireh, not the scorched trial, not the awful place, not the, he doesn't name it Garbage Hill. He names it God will provide. And I love that, because that's exactly what God has done for you and me. He has provided a lamb to take away the sins of the world, so that when we put our trust in Him, we'll not perish but have everlasting life. I love the way that God uses this symbolism. Many years later, when the children of Israel are wandering around in the wilderness, it says that they were murmuring in their tents. Actually, it doesn't tell us that. It says they were murmuring, but later on in Psalms it tells us they murmured in their tents. And what happened was God would allow these fiery serpents to come in amongst the camp and bite the people. And people were dying, bitten by these serpents. And as people are dying, Moses hears about it, and the people come to Moses and they cry out to Moses, "Help us." And so God, or Moses goes to God and he says, "God, what do we do? These serpents are killing people." And God says, "I want you to make a brass serpent. And I want you to put it on a pole." Well, the pole that he put it on was, the word in the Hebrew is standard, a standard pole. Now, you know what a standard is, right? It's a flag that you hang on a pole. Now, a standard pole is a large pole with a cross beam on it, and the standard hangs down like that, right? He says, put it on a standard and raise it up. And anybody who's bitten by the serpents only has to look at the pole, at the snake on the pole. And when they look at it, they will be healed. And so Abraham fashions the serpent of bronze, and he puts it on the standard pole, and he raises it up in the camp of Israel, and people who are bit by the serpents, they look at the pole and they're saved. It's pretty crazy. What's the significance of that? I'm sure that there were people in their sickbed, inside their tent. "I've been bitten by a snake. Give me some medicine. You just need to go outside and look at that pole." I don't want anything to do with the stupid pole. I don't believe that. I don't want anything to do with that. But then, again, 1,000 years later, Jesus would say in John chapter 3, just as Moses lifted up the pole in the wilderness, it's like 3:14, 15, somewhere in there. Just as Moses lifted up the pole in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. What is He talking about? Well, if you think about it, you have a snake, which represents what? Garden of Eden, sin, right? People are bitten by sin. So He fashions a snake representing sin, and He makes it out of brass. Remember the brazen altar where the fire comes up and consumes the sacrifice? Brass in the Old Testament always speaks of judgment. And He puts it on a cross. Sin judged on a cross, and whoever looks on it will be saved. Whoever believes on it. So must the Son of Man be lifted up on a cross, and whoever believes in Him will not perish but have everlasting life. Isn't it amazing? These pictures in the Old Testament, Abraham and Isaac, the brass serpent in the wilderness, and how God has told us beforehand. I don't know what rabbi it was that hid the gospel in the Old Testament. But it's there so clearly. And we can trust God's word. It's just amazing. It says, verse 15, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven. And notice this. And he said, by myself I have sworn. So this is God again. Says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. And so God again affirms his promises to Abraham. He's saying, because you really believe me. And I don't think God doubted Abraham's belief, although he had reason to. Abraham kind of wavered there as he was younger. But now Abraham's like, I'm sold out to God now. I know God's good on his word. And Abraham, who was willing to give up his only son, and I love the way that Tozer puts it, he says he not only had his son close and safe by his side, but he had all of his possessions, all his camels, herds, donkeys, everything that God had given him, and yet he didn't own any of them. He owned God and only God. And God became his possession, and God became what was precious to Abraham. And so too it has to be for us. That God becomes the thing that we love and the thing that we cherish. And oftentimes when we will love God first, he gives us all other things to enjoy as well. But only when we love him first. Only when he becomes our primary possession. And that's what God was to Abraham. He loved God and he possessed only God. And everything else was just a blessing on top of the one thing that Abraham really wanted, which was God. So it says, Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Something glaringly missing here. What does it say? What's missing in verse 19? Anybody? What's missing in verse 19? Yeah, Isaac is missing. So Abraham returned to the young man. Isaac ran away. No. Isaac, figuratively, has just been crucified, right? Just been killed. So Abraham comes down, but it doesn't talk about Isaac coming back. In fact, we don't even find Isaac at all until when? Until he comes out to get his bride. Isn't that beautiful? Just like Jesus, he is crucified and we don't see him again until he comes back for his bride. And so we'll see that as we move forward. So Abraham returns with the young men, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. Now it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Indeed Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. So his wife gave him some children. These are great names. Huz, his firstborn; Buz, his brother; Kemuel, the father of Aram; Chesed; Hazo, Pildash; Jidlaph; Bethuel. Bethuel is the one that's important, so that's all that matters. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. So Rebekah becomes very significant because she will become Isaac's wife. And it says, excuse me, his concubine, whose name is Ramah, also bore Tebah, Gaham, Thahash, and Macha. I don't know how you pronounce that. Fun names. But anyway, we're going to kind of zoom in on Rebekah, because she's going to be the bride of Isaac, and we'll see how the Lord brings them together in much the same way, very prophetically, as he showed us in this chapter as well. So let's pray.